Nozomi stood among rows of people dressed in black as bells rang through the hall, watching them bow their heads and exchange quiet words, as if she had simply wandered in late and hadn't yet figured out where to stand. It took longer for the scene to register properly, her attention drifting toward the front of the room, toward the photograph placed beside the altar, and the name written beneath it, before the meaning finally settled in, and the discomfort in her chest grew into something harder to ignore. This funeral was for her. The thought came with a sense of irritation, because standing through your own funeral wasn't frightening so much as weird. She looked around, half expecting someone to notice her staring, to react in some way that confirmed she was still part of the room. But people moved past her without hesitation, wiping their eyes, clasping their hands together, prayers that slid right past her as if she weren't there at all. Even when she stepped closer to her family, close enough to hear their voices, nothing changed. And that was when the explanation formed naturally in her mind. Maybe she was already dead. Maybe she was a ghost. That would explain why no one acknowledged her presence, why she could stand right there and still be invisible. She tried to speak, not loudly, just enough to test it, and the room carried on without reacting, the silence hanging heavy as the minutes stretched on, until something finally broke the pattern. A stranger passing by let his gaze drift toward her, and for just a moment their eyes met, before he looked away again too quickly, his expression tightening as if he'd made a mistake. The way he reacted stuck with her. He wasn't surprised, just tense, like he'd reacted to something he wasn't supposed to. She watched him move forward and pay his respects like everyone else, and when he passed her back again and leaned in close, quietly telling her to follow him, she didn't argue or question it, because at that point, he was the only thing in the room that might explain what was happening. They left the funeral hall together and stepped into a space she didn't recognize, and when he introduced himself as Yoko, she asked why someone she had never met would be at her funeral, and the explanation came plainly, that he was a spirit medium, and that helping spirits who couldn't move on was his job. He explained her situation, saying that spirits who linger always have something tying them down, regrets, unfinished matters, feelings that were never resolved, and that once those were addressed, they could pass on. When he turned the question back to her and asked what she had left undone, the answer came out before she thought about it. Nothing. She repeated that there wasn't anything she regretted leaving behind, and instead of moving on, the moment dragged in a way she hadn't expected, like he was waiting for something else to come out. She thought about it again anyway, going back over the same places in her head, and still came up empty. And when the question shifted to what she had lived for, the answer came out the same, that she didn't know, that there hadn't really been one. The silence that followed felt familiar. She had spent a lot of time in it before, back when days followed the same routine without her questioning them much. Back in middle school, listening to a friend asking her to hang out after school, only to turn it down again for the same reasons as always. Studying, a mother working late. Bad grades would only make things harder at home. The irritation that followed those refusals never surprised her. Classmates brushing her off as boring, a bookworm who wouldn't be fun anyway. And she let it pass without pushing back, telling herself it didn't matter. All she had to do was endure. If she worked hard, got into a good high school, found a job and made things even a little easier for her mother, then everything would be worth it. And that plan gave her life direction, even if it left no room for anything else. She remembered her mother working long shifts at a convenience store, forcing herself to smile anyway, and that image was enough to keep her moving forward without questioning what she wanted for herself. That structure began to crack one evening when she found her mother standing beside a man she didn't recognize. The explanation delivered quickly that he was someone she was remarrying. The reaction from her sisters split the home immediately. confusion and anger spilling out as they demanded to know why their mother always made decisions without talking to them first, just like when she divorced their father. Her mother apologized, explaining that remarriage would mean coming home earlier, that she wouldn't have to rely on Nozomi as much anymore, that the housework would be her responsibility again, and that Nozomi could live for herself now. The words were meant to sound reassuring, but they landed strangely. Working hard for her family was a big part of who she was, and being told she wasn't needed anymore left her without anything obvious to replace it. Living for herself sounded simple when her mother said it, but once the house went quiet again, the idea didn't come with any instructions. She tried to think about what she liked, what she wanted to do, and came up empty, the questions looping without finding anywhere to land. The first attempt at changing anything came later, on the day of her high school entrance ceremony, when she showed up with her hair dyed a lighter color, not as a statement so much as a test, a small adjustment meant to prove she could still choose something on her own. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Teachers scolding her before she could even process what was happening, telling her to diet back right away, making it clear that a school like this had no tolerance for that kind of behavior, threatening not to let her attend the ceremony at all. On her way home, she ran into her friend Tsubasa, the timing awkward enough to make both of them pause for a second. Tsubasa expressed her confusion about the new look. When she tried to explain herself, the response came back bluntly, that it didn't suit her, that it looked bad on her, that it was embarrassing. The words landed harder than the earlier scolding had, because they confirmed something she had already been thinking, that even if she tried to change, there wasn't really anywhere she fit. She didn't argue. She didn't explain further. She left. The street blurred as she ran, her thoughts narrowing down until there wasn't much left to hold on to. The idea of disappearing slipping in without resistance. And when the sound of a horn cut through everything, it barely registered before the impact knocked the rest away. When awareness returned, Yoko sitting next to her again, the transition so smooth it felt like the accident had happened to someone else. She talked about it calmly, describing what happened without stopping herself, admitting that the first thing she felt afterward wasn't fear, but relief. The sense that she wouldn't have to keep thinking about what to do anymore, that the problem had ended on its own. That was where things stalled. Again. He asked whether there was really nothing she regretted, and she gave the same answer as before, only now it felt thinner, like it didn't cover as much as it had earlier. He suggested that she go see her family again, just to check, guiding her back toward the funeral hall, then nudging her forward once she hesitated, encouraging her to look a little closer this time. She saw her friend first, crying quietly, shoulders shaking as she tried to pull herself together. And then she saw her mother, breaking down completely, apologizing over and over, blaming herself for not doing enough, for never making her eldest daughter happy, for relying on her when she shouldn't have. That was when the words finally pushed up all at once. She wanted to tell her that she was wrong, that she had never thought of it that way, that even with everything that hurt, home had still been a place she felt safe, that she had been happy there. The urge to correct it was immediate and overwhelming, the realization forming clearly for the first time that this was what she had left undone. Not an action, not a goal, but saying how she actually felt. She turned back toward Yoko, asking if he could tell them for her, the request coming out without a plan behind it, and his answer came just as plainly that he wouldn't. The change after that was sudden. The ground gave way beneath her feet as he shoved her forward, her body dropping into a black sludge that swallowed sound and movement alike. his voice carrying calmly as he told her that the things she wanted to say had to be said properly, in her own words, that a human life ended quickly, that she had simply been unlucky, and that whether she made good use of this chance or not was up to her. Something hit the surface beside her as she sank, a mirror slipping into the dark with her, and as she struggled to breathe, the reflection shifted, beginning to show her things she hadn't been meant to see, the image sharpening despite the darkness pressing in from every side. And the first thing it showed her was her mother, speaking in a voice that came from carrying something too long without ever setting it down. She talked about her daughters, about how she had leaned too heavily on her eldest without realizing it, about how she kept telling herself it was temporary, that things would get easier once they were older, once she could breathe again, and how somewhere along the way she had stopped noticing how much weight she was putting on Nozomi's shoulders. She said she wanted her to live freely. She said she wanted to put her at ease as soon as possible, so she wouldn't have to keep worrying anymore. The words landing unevenly because they were late, because they were thoughts that only seemed to surface once there was no one left to hear. The image shifted before she could really focus on it, the mirror settling on her friend instead, walking beside someone else and talking it through. She kept coming back to the same point, questioning why Nozomi would change her look only after transferring schools, why she would suddenly decide to do something like that now, when she had never once stayed behind before. The timing bothered her more than anything else, the sense that it felt deliberate, like Nozomi had chosen to put distance between herself and everyone else first, and only then decided to change, as if they hadn't been worth her time. The complaint didn't last long before it softened, her voice dropping as she admitted that what bothered her most was that if Nozomi had wanted to change, she wished she had done it back then, when they were still together every day, when there was still time to understand each other. She said she kept inviting her not because she expected her to say yes, but because stopping felt like giving up on her, and she wasn't ready for that. None of it sounded the way Nozomi imagined it would. There was no resentment there, no judgment, just a collection of thoughts that had never found their way to her while she was alive, sitting plainly in front of her now, impossible to respond to. The distance she had felt for so long didn't come from being pushed away. It came from everything she had never said, and everything no one had known how to say to her in return. The realization settled slowly, tightening in her chest as the sludge crept higher, her lungs burning as instinct kicked in without anywhere to go. And in that moment, the regret she had insisted she didn't have finally took shape. A simple, overwhelming wish to speak, to tell them thank you, to tell them she had been happy, to say the words she had kept to herself until there was no time left. Her breath gave out before the thought could finish. Then she heard her name. It came from far away at first, faint and stretched thin, pulling her upward whether she wanted it to or not, and the darkness peeled back all at once as she gasped for air, her body jolting awake in a hospital bed, as familiar voices broke into cries the moment her eyes opened. Hands grabbed at her sleeves. Someone called her name again. Someone else told her to stay still. She was alive. Elsewhere, the funeral hall dissolved as suddenly as it had formed. The people gathered there straightening up as the space shifted around them, their expressions changing as horns emerged and illusions dropped away, irritation bubbling up the moment the act was over. Complaints flew immediately, voices overlapping as they pointed out how sloppy it had been, How obvious the setup nearly was, how much time had been wasted on a single case when there were countless others waiting. They reminded him that suicide was still murder, that the rules didn't bend just because someone was hurting, and that dragging things out like this only made the work harder for everyone else. Yoko didn't argue with the rule itself, but the discomfort stayed on his face as he listened, the questions sitting there unspoken. Whether sending someone like that straight to punishment made any sense at all. Someone muttered about how troublesome the future looked with him in charge, wondering why the previous Enma had ever passed the position on to someone so soft. And another voice followed, quieter, pointing out that this way of thinking might be exactly why the role had been entrusted to him in the first place. The mirror was lowered into the dark liquid once more, the surface clearing to show Nozomi lying in the hospital bed, her sisters clutching her hands, her mother crying openly without trying to hide it this time, relief written across her face as plainly as fear had been earlier. Yoko watched without speaking. Whether the choice had been right or not would take time to answer, but for now, the soul he had tested was breathing again, surrounded by people who had never stopped caring. And that, at least, felt like something worth waiting to see.